Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Deconstructors Club. We're so glad that you can join us. I am your host, Alex Weiss, co-host Bob Azarito here with us. And we are going to be talking about and really following up from the last episode that we had with Gabby, who is the director of Sacramento Area Congregations Together, SACACT, here locally, which is a chapter of the greater federation or greater organization called Faith in Action. That's at the national level. Bob, how you doing? How you feeling? I kind of wanted to touch a little bit of how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah. These are difficult days in some ways. In fact, I think we had Gabby not last week.
Last week before. The week before.
But we invited her because as a result of this election and the way the election went, the thought that we may be faced with some new or renewed challenges for our culture and society, and especially in our nonprofits and our churches.
Right.
And so we wanted to have a conversation with her a little bit about that and about what does she think is coming. And it was a great time of talking. In fact, we had discussed having her back again to maybe get more specific, particularly in the area of the potential deportations.
Right.
What does that mean for us locally? And also
talk a little bit more about, because I know I've had people asking me, what do we do? What do we do? Especially for the vulnerable and the marginalized, and going into this next presidency next year. That's one of the things I think that we'd love to talk to her about. If people are interested in doing something, which they are, community organizing is huge.
Yeah.
In being able to resist the unjust policies that are going to be set in motion.
And part of the problem is we don't really know completely all that's going to be happening, because we know that the campaign tends to make these gigantic sort of proclamations about what's coming to get votes, and so we don't really know exactly to what level these things are going to happen.
Yeah.
So, but you almost can't wait until it happens.
No, you got to get ready for something. You got to get ready for it.
And we will hope that maybe it's not all needed, but you have to be prepared to stand against some of these new policies that may be coming for our local community.
And, from the last time in 2016, going into 2017, his first presidential election, or when he won, Trump went in actually executing a lot of things that he said. And that was something that you were hearing the narrative of, he was just politicking, right? But no, he actually came through with some of those things.
You're going to see something. You're going to see some effort to follow, more effort to follow through than even he was able to do the first time around.
Right.
And so that's why we're realizing that, no, it's not just talk. There is going to be, and the people he has gathered around him, especially, are architects of these kinds of efforts. And so that's a big concern.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because right after Gabby was here, she invited us to be able to go to a trip to Washington, D.C., where their mother organization that I had mentioned earlier, Faith in Action, had their summit, their large event. And it was to prepare for what's to come, right?
Yeah.
And the title was called Architects of a New America. So I thought it was a great title for it, because you were talking about, Trump going in with his architects. Well, we have to have our architects.
Absolutely.
And there was several issues that we looked at. You were asking earlier before we started this episode, the breakdown of certain things of what to do. Well, in particular, the meeting was more about how do we get prepared? Because then we'll set up the trainings, or they, according to them, of course, Faith in Action, and they set up the trainings for it. For instance, one of those is mass deportation and what's going to happen. With mass deportation, how do we prepare for that? How do we prepare our community for that? How do we prepare people for that? How do we prepare separation of families that are going to happen? What do we do as people of faith? How do we come alongside those that are vulnerable in this hour, or coming up this new next year? What are ways that we can begin to organize and strategize to be able to be prepared to be on response to whatever happens in this time of mass deportation. There's not much that we can do to resist what's going to happen, but there's a lot that we can do to at least try to protect and help. I mean, we got to resist, definitely, but we're going to do our best to be able to help people. And so there's going to be trainings that are going to be done. And it's one of the reasons why I want Gabby to come back so that she can talk about that. She can talk about the trainings that are going to be done here locally. Also, Faith in Action has chapters all over the country for people that are listening to us, viewing us, that are from other cities. There definitely is some type of federation, nonprofit federation that stands for the vulnerable, does the work of justice, that's more than likely connected to Faith in Action that you could probably get involved with. And we'll talk about that some more, probably by next episode. But when we talk about faith, or we talk about justice issues, these are the things that I kind of wanted to bring up with you. For instance, the things that we touched on, I have my list here, was, mass deportation or immigration reform. We know that's, sadly, it's been a joke because nothing has been said and done, nothing, either on both sides of the aisle. It's just not happening. So the mass deportation that's coming up, we talked about, that issue. Another issue is mass incarceration, which is also part of the detention centers for those that are going to be deported. They could be in there for a month, like 3 months, like maybe even a year or two. Mass incarceration, what that means to our communities. Education, what we're talking about, the privatization of education so that so that the administration can flip the narrative of how our children are being taught, especially about our history. So that's another key thing. Economic development, housing, the issues that we're going through, and how the economy is, what a lot of people think is going to get better, it might get worse. So what are we going to do when it comes to housing and economic development, healthcare, of course, and then climate justice? These are issues that we briefly touched on, but some of them we kind of spent a little bit more time in this meeting in Washington, D.C. Now, I know, Bob, you didn't have a chance to go. I had a chance to go and be able to, learn a lot of things and basically make a lot of the connections. So that way, coming back, we can, even by next week here locally, hit the ground running and start talking about how do we get prepared and ready for that.
And at least what we can do is sometimes what's hard is getting the word out. So things are happening or there are organizations that are doing things, but it's really, really important that people know what is happening and they understand and they can find ways that they can participate. So we're hoping to use this podcast as maybe one of the small ways that we can sort of spread the word about what's going on. And that's, specifics probably we won't be able to know specifically until after January 20th and until this new administration comes into power. But he has promised, whether he'll do it or not, he has promised that from day one or on day one, he would deportation was going to be at the top of his agenda. And so we may see that more quickly than we were hoping. But we do need to be ready, but we may not know specifically what will be called on to do.
And that's the neat thing about Faith in Action, because there's a list of things that people can do. And we want to be able to talk about that because I know there's a lot of people that have deconstructed, because before the narrative was, when we were in the evangelical conservative side of things, is that, they're breaking the law, they're sinning against God, and we don't understand the reasons why they're here and why they came, fleeing from their countries and all of that.
Sure.
But the narrative is one thing. But in deconstructing, I know there's a lot of people out there that are asking, what do we do now? I don't want to be those kind of people that are, saying they can't be here. I want to be the kind of people that says, how do we support? How do we help them? Because they are a big, big plus to the economy. Besides them, of course, being the image of God and number one, and being people that we need to value as our brothers and sisters.
Right. So it could be helpful for us. We've talked about this a bit on the podcast before, and that is how we interpreted or how we understood justice when we were within an evangelical system. For me growing up, and this isn't necessarily across the board understanding. But for me, growing up in those earlier years, justice was not viewed as helping the vulnerable in society. That is not.
That's not the narrative of justice.
So when you talk about justice,
evangelicalism, yes,
in the church, there's a segment of the church that does not view justice, the term justice, as applying to the relieving of suffering or the protection of the disenfranchised or the vulnerable. They don't. That's not justice in the minds of certain evangelical systems. And fortunately, it's not as across the board as it was, 20, 30 years ago. At least today, there are some evangelicals who have broadened their understanding of justice to include, making a difference in society, and particularly defending those who are voiceless or defenseless.
Right.
And so I think it's important to bring out. I think it's important to talk about some of the ways in which Christians can even sit on the sidelines because they don't view standing up for the poor or the disenfranchised as a Christian obligation. They don't view it. It's like optional.
Right.
Right. You don't have to do it. It's not that big of a thing.
Yeah, and it's only for people that are passionate about
it.
That's just a part of ministry.
It's not the main part of being a Christ follower. But yet what we've been trying to say is actually it is maybe the most important aspect of justice in terms of following Jesus.
Right.
That, when you look at the life of Jesus, and Jesus, for the most part, defended and spoke for those who were the most needy in the community, and spoke against those who treated those people indiscriminately and with cruelty.
Well, he stood with the disenfranchised.
Stood with them, and
he stood with
it's
the
really
rejected,
important
the hated,
to
the marginalized.
It's important to really get an appreciation for that aspect,
right?
Because that's a really central part of our topic,
and it should be the central part of being a Christian. Is following his ways. It's interesting because right now that you're mentioning, that is the focus of what justice means. Before, when I was a conservative Christian, justice was focused more around like religious freedoms, which really is Christian dominance, right? It's not religious freedom, because if it was religious freedom, that means you would be for pluralism. In other words, everybody would have the right to worship in their way and, in their religions. But really, when they talk about fighting for religious freedoms, or for our religious freedom, it's really saying fighting for Christian dominance, because Christianity has been already the dominant religion in this society. So the moment pluralism wants to kind of push a little bit, in the sense of resisting that dominance, there's this overreaction to, we got to do something about justice has to be done here. Right.
But I want to go back even a little before that, because that's still, it's a little bit of a
I know, because abortion is another one that we can talk about.
Picking and choosing of issues that you believe need justice. But there was a time in my upbringing when justice was all about God's punishment of sinners.
Oh, okay.
You might
you're not even talking about compassion or mercy.
No. This is God
or rectifying things,
because we had to say that the gospel was not just love; it was love and justice. It was God punishing humans for sin.
Because it's a punitive justice, not a restorative justice.
No. It was definitely punitive.
It's a punitive justice.
It was like the only way you could get out from under the punitive justice of God was to have this experience, or to join the church, or to have a conversion experience within you. that made you now stamped with the approved
Right.
stamp on the forehead that said that you are now a member.
You're forgiven.
You're now
but
forgiven.
Watch out still.
You're
But
now
watch
forgiven.
out.
No, and you are free. You are
Right.
now justice. God can't hurt you now.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So it doesn't
It
matter
was
what,
transferred to Jesus on the cross.
no matter what you do, you are forgiven.
Right.
So you're not accountable to anything that happens on the earth. I mean, you might get punished by Jesus or by God if you step outside the bounds of acceptable behavior.
Yeah, it's like
and
a
God
corrective
still may
punishment, they say. It's
discipline you.
corrective discipline,
God
yeah.
may still, but essentially, you are now free. So
Right.
there's no real responsibility toward your suffering brothers and sisters. There's
Right.
no responsibility for those
Right.
that are hurting, for those that are disenfranchised. Like I said, there's no. I don't have to do anything for anyone. I mean, I have to help others be more obedient to the standards of behavior that we've accepted as evangelicals. That's important. I need to correct you. I need to keep you. So I need to keep you from doing bad things.
Right.
That's part of but that's the extent of my responsibility. And I think those who are listening to us today, maybe that's not the form of evangelicalism that you grew up in, but it's definitely a very strong form of evangelical systems that say that it's very individualistic. It's
Very
my.
individual. I was going to say
it's
that.
my
That's
safety.
good. Right.
So that God needs to be nice to me because I've done the things that I'm supposed to do, which is believe in Jesus,
Right.
accept Jesus into my heart, be converted,
Right.
and now I'm a Christian, and now I'm safe.
Right.
And it's about me, about my safety, my okayness. Maybe my family's now safe. You know, we even invented the rapture as ultimate safety, that God's not even going to allow you to go through any suffering in the world. He's going to take you out of the world in the nick of time before the world really suffers badly. And I just want to say to all of my evangelical friends, if you think that is not it's not accurate, and it's not logical, accurate, biblical, or is it wise? Because you are not preparing yourself for what may actually be coming. Because if things happen in society, I guarantee you, no one's going to ask you if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the people we are going to deport and put into detention camps and make families suffer, most of those folks are Christians.
Right.
So the ultimate suffering is not going to protect them. And it's also not going to protect you or me or really anyone else if you get sideways with the powers that be.
And what you're saying is always been at the center of our Christianity in our nation, which has been always individualistic, never taking responsibility of community and the most vulnerable in our community. That is the way of Jesus. But we have Christianity, especially Western Christianity, has completely inverted it to say, I'm at the center, not community is at the center.
Yeah. Or at least to make it a second tier obedience.
Right.
You know, first tier obedience is to,
me
really
at the center because I got to do the right things all the time, right? I mean, I got to talk right. I got to dress.
Well, you have to go to church.
Right. I got to go to church, and I got to do all of these things.
Support
that
the system.
I'm supposed to be doing the institution.
Reach others. Do recruiting for the church. Bring people into
evangelism
the church,
and
the way
all of
they
these things.
would define. That'd be another interesting episode to
talk about evangelism.
Define evangelism more clearly.
But it's bringing people to church. I'm checking off the boxes.
That's the number one. That's the number one. That's in my upbringing. That was the number one obedience.
Right.
And then if you can be nice to other people. If you could do that,
people.
but it all has to be ultimately for recruitment purposes.
Well, yeah, it's performative. It's not because you're guided by love.
The reason you feed the poor is to make them Christians.
Right.
The reason you are nice to your neighbors is to make them Christians and maybe bring them to church. The whole point is, it's an thrust
exchange.
Is if the key is to get people into heaven.
Right.
And if you can recruit them appropriately, and I'm saying it in a very stark way, they would have never used these terms, but it's basically the reality. Getting them to accept Jesus, to accept my definition of what that means. Bring him in. We've talked about this many times before. But all the other things, standing for injustice in the world, no. In fact, I heard recently, my pastor, that it was my pastor growing up, I heard him recently say, why are you trying to improve the world? Why are you trying to spend any time
because of the fatalistic theology is
changing, feeding the poor, getting education, doing anything for the society? Why are you trying? It's just going to keep getting worse. It's in the Bible. It's going to get worse. And all we must do is just wait for Jesus to return. So stop wasting your time trying to make the world a better place. Can you believe that someone who's calling themselves a pastor is actually telling people, why are you wasting your time trying to make the world more fair, more just, more equal, more kind? Why are you worrying about relieving the suffering of people? Just recruit them to believe in Jesus and bring them to the church. That should be your only effort.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to get upset about that, but it's so, I feel like inside I feel frustrated.
It is so irresponsible.
It's so frustrating.
Because we are not making the world a better place. Jesus's prayer, when he talked about your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the will of God on earth isn't to destroy it
or ignore it.
Yeah. It's to love those that are in the world and be able to do that by justice, by doing justice, doing
love
what's
them
right.
Beyond just trying to get
them into heaven.
Get them into our church and get them to believe what we think they need to believe.
Right.
And by the way, there are many people, many churches, even evangelical churches that have recognized that error and have actually shifted to be more conscious of the world.
Right.
But it's a move away from from real evangelical theology, because real evangelical theology would say you're wasting your time to do that. What you need to be doing is to prepare people to be able to get into heaven, because ultimate justice is to escape the justice of God.
And I was part of a mega church years ago, and they would do a lot of things for the community. They would see the need that's out there. They would, do their surveys, and then they would do these big events, and they would do these. But the objective was never because we just want to love and help and serve and do whatever we can to especially, serve the vulnerable. Their idea was because we want people to come in this door. That's the bottom line. We can get all of these people in here and then preach to them the gospel for them to accept Jesus. We've done our part. And it's like, that's not the way Jesus did it. He did way more than just do these events to give people what they need, the charity, so that that way they can come to church. It was more about him standing with them. It was more about him walking with them. It was more about him being even one of them and suffering because of that. Identifying with those that are oppressed and marginalized, standing in solidarity with them and being a voice, a big time voice for them. So, and he lost his life because of it.
Yeah.
And that, and so the church is not risking anything by doing those things. They're not risking anything. Where it becomes risky is when you start standing in solidarity, like we were talking about with immigrants, What do we do to serve these families? What do we do to stand in solidarity with them? What do we do to protect them? It's going to cost us. It's going to be, well, of course it is. It did. That's the same to Jesus when he stood with people that were considered outcasts and even criminal.
Yeah, and I've heard people justify these deportation actions based upon the fact that they have broken the law to be here without through illegal
processes.
Yeah, and so I think it's kind of odd to say that because someone out of desperation, mostly people coming into this country out of either economic desperation or actual violence, is trying to escape violence, that because they're here illegal, it gives us carte blanche to treat them any way we want.
Right.
What kind of thinking is that? That we can just round them up and throw them into a detention center and treat them, separate them from their children, and do whatever we think
in humane ways. And it's interesting because the Bible doesn't teach that, from the Old to the New, and in particular the Old Testament. God is telling his people that they needed to love the immigrant as they love themselves,
and at least treat people with dignity and kindness and love and understanding. And I was thinking to myself, a lot of the people that are going to suffer under some of these new deportation efforts or threats will be people who have jobs, who pay taxes, who are doing things and serving their community in some very important ways, people that are actually positive influences in society, and we're going to rip them out. Some have been here 5, 10, 20 years, and they're going to be deported because they don't have a legal paper. Why don't we find a way to since they already have jobs, since they're already a beneficial part of the community, why don't we, as part of the process, find ways to give them legal status? Right. Why do we just assume that no matter who they are, no matter how long they've been here, no matter what they've done in a positive way, we're just going to rip them out of society and out of the only life that they've known, and send them back to a country that some of them, the children, some of them have never even visited.
And might we remember, this is a nation of immigrants.
Absolutely. And we did a lot. My grandfather, when he came to this country in the early 1900s, I'm sorry. Yeah, in the early 1919, sometime around there. He didn't fill out any paperwork before he got on the
And that was the point. Because a lot of people, that's the point. A lot of people say, well, they did it legal. This is illegal.
But the
processes were completely different.
Totally. They just welcomed them. I think we went through Ellis Island. Welcomed them. It took a little bit of time. Filled out the paper. Do you have any sicknesses? They just filled out the stuff. What's your line of work? Blah blah blah. And brought them in.
Right.
And then my grandfather, who was a shoemaker, got a job and became part of American society. What happened to those days when we welcomed people?
When you look at history, every single wave of immigration added to the economy. It made the country stronger, not weaker.
Absolutely.
And we're finding that right now. With a lot of them are doing the jobs that basically a lot of other citizens would not do.
Well, and so much of the modern mentality has been fueled by fear tactics. To say that everyone coming in is a drug pusher or member of the car. Everyone coming in is a rapist. Everyone coming in is and they've just created this idea.
And it's not to say that there aren't aspects, but a lot of these people are families, people that they're running. A lot of these people are running away from those things.
Most of them,
right?
Most of them.
And if you ask, how do we know? I know because I've been down there many times. I've worked in the border many times. We've done many things, especially in helping them with shelters, with the asylum seekers the last, 5-6 years. You meet these people, how are they violent? How are they, the way the narrative is being put out on this side? It's like, these people are families. These people are Christian. These people, they prayed with us when we were in those shelters, and, they mobbed around us so that we could pray. It's amazing to be able to talk to them, to talk to a lot of the young kids that their parents sent, because they were like, we don't want them to get involved in the violence that's going on here. Good kids. It was just it was so interesting to see and hear and get the experience of them.
So we did have firsthand experience.
And then we had Venezuelans here.
We had 20 Venezuelans that our church opened up their arms to.
That's correct.
We welcomed them for some meals. We spent some time with them. We did a few other things with them. I would say, to a person, they were all very respectful, kind, energetic. Mm-hmm. They wanted to work. They wanted to participate in society.
Be a contributor. They didn't come here to be taking. They came here to work and give.
Absolutely. And I didn't meet one a member of the cartel. I didn't meet one rapist. I didn't meet one criminal. I didn't meet we're trying to tell people
that's all
they are. They're only that. And it's unfortunate because the fact is, deportations have been a part of every administration going way back. Right. Every administration has had to deport thousands and thousands of immigrants. Mm-hmm. It's true. But it's those who have been who were criminals, who were caught, who were processed, and who were sent back because they demonstrated to be a very harmful part of our society, and so that was part of their. Instead of putting them into our jail system, they just sent them back to their own country. So I'm not saying that there isn't any at all. Yeah, of course there is, and there always has been. Right, thousands of deportations, legitimately supported deportations. But if you're talking about taking people who have been here for 10 years, who have been a viable, important, respectful, and crucial part of our society, doing jobs that were really needed, and they were good at it, and then just uprooting them for no reason. Other than the fact that they came here and weren't given the opportunity to have legal status.
And one of the things I find interesting is that a lot of people don't even understand or know this, that they pay taxes without any benefits.
So I read recently that the illegal immigrants in this, undocumented immigrants in America pay over $10 billion in taxes.
Crazy. And yet they don't benefit from a lot of that.
No,
they're not. The Social Security is not getting stored up for them.
No.
Yet for us, the citizens, it is.
Right.
So
$10 billion. It shocked me when I heard that number. It's a huge number. Of a huge number for the taxes being paid by undocumented workers, and it's just goes to show that so much of what. It's so unrealistic and so detrimental. Right. If you were really to remove all of those people, our economy would be a disaster. Enormously. It would be a disaster. Mm-hmm.
It would suffer.
And yet,
the prices of produce, the way the economy is set up right now, there's a lot of immigrants that are contributing to the economy.
Absolutely.
And the produce
most
that you're
of
eating,
them,
the foods that you're getting.
Most of them.
Yes. The service jobs that they do. Who is going to fill those jobs? So this whole narrative of they're here taking jobs, who's going to do theirs when they're gone?
Absolutely.
So, and I think that there's a real importance to understand at least that narrative. But if we really want to talk about the faith narrative, it's so clear. And you're talking about literal, taking something literal. Well, the Bible literally is talking about how we need to welcome the foreigner. We need to love the foreigner. We need to, give to the foreigner and help them. And in Matthew 25, we see that when Jesus, he's asked in that day, Judgment Day, and they're asking him, how did you know that we were a stranger? When I welcomed you in, you're welcome me in. That's what the Lord is saying, right? And I think that that's the key. Instead of the welcoming hospitality spirit that we're supposed to have as Christians, we're the ones that are saying, deport them. We're the ones that are saying they're not supposed to be here. And we need to really shift our narrative to the gospel narrative. That is the gospel narrative, because that's what Jesus did, and even throughout the Bible.
So if you look into the Old Testament, where the prophets were speaking to Israel and was warning them about judgment. You talk about justice here, warning them about judgment coming.
Right.
And Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, all of them. When they enumerated what the infraction was about, if you go and look at it, the infraction was always, you have mistreated the poor.
Right.
You have disregarded the orphan, the widow, the disenfranchised. You have taken advantage of those who didn't have any power. You've taken advantage of them, and there are consequences.
And you've mistreated the foreigner. That's a big one.
And the consequences are going to be visited upon you as a nation as a result of those actions. We forget that not only feeding the poor and caring for the hurting and the neglected, not only is that what Jesus did, and what obedience to Jesus is about, if we're going to follow him. Not only is that the case, but all of the judgments of the Old Testament upon Israel were based upon the nation forgetting to care about the stranger among them, and to care about those that were the most disenfranchised among them. And I just think it's amazing how we talk about Christianity and forget about that.
Right.
How can you can't even really talk about Christianity or Judaism and not recognize the centrality of those obligations and encouragements.
Right. At the core of what God wanted his people to do was to love justice. Is to love justice, not the punitive justice, the justice that stands for the marginalized and the oppressed.
Yep.
And why? Because if they would mistreat them, they were hurting the heart of God.
Yeah. And if there's any punitive justice,
it's
for those that neglect the actual restorative justice of caring for those who are most vulnerable among us.
So I'm glad that we're talking about this. I know we're almost through with this episode, and kind of putting a little bit of a foundation of what's to come, because we're going to talk about how to be able to stand with those that are marginalized and oppressed, especially through the policies that are going to be coming up coming next year. And we have to be able to come together and be able to, respond in such a way that we need to be courageous at this time. It's not going to be an easy time. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to shift, and we're going to see a lot of people suffering, and we're going to see a lot of people hurting. How do we respond? We have to respond. If we truly have the love of Christ inside of us, the image of God we see in others, we have to respond in a loving way, in a compassionate way, in a way that reflects the ethic of Christ. And I think that we're at that point where this is where rubber hits the road. One of the things that happened in 2016 for me was that I went through my grieving process and my mourning process when, the elections came out the way they did. But the thing that I really, really thought of when the new year started was, you know what? I can't do church as usual. I I can't just focus on the institution and manage and what's in here. We got to do something about what's out there. How do we begin to focus on those that are really suffering out there? And for me, it was a shift. And even though earlier on, I kind of felt that in my heart, but I wasn't really, really shifting outwardly. I was a senior pastor. I had a staff. I had, I had a large congregation, and it felt like I was more maintaining what I had than truly making a difference. And so that was a part of my deconstruction too. I said, I can't do this anymore. I really just, one day it just clicked to me. And it's like, I cannot do it this way any longer. This is not, I don't think this is the way of Christ, and I'm managing an institution. I am not making a difference in impacting those that are marginalized and oppressed. And so that sent me on a journey of really figuring out the justice issues, the real justice issues, and helping those that are vulnerable. And now we find ourselves once again in the same boat. Yeah. And I think that a lot of us now are saying, okay, rubber hits the road. We got to get involved. We got to figure things out. And I want to kind of just give us that intro with this episode, because maybe the next 1 or 2 episodes, we're going to be able to give some details of how we can get involved with these justice initiatives and what are ways that we truly can make a difference.
And what you realize is that the church, which sometimes is used to being the leaders of these things, because the churches have not focused so much on some of these national concerns,
right?
And we're going to have to follow. We're going to have to find those organizations that are poised and have been working on these kinds of issues for a long, long time.
And it's interesting that you're saying we have to find them, because it's not the church that's doing it for the most part.
No, and I think that the church hopefully can recognize the need and then respond with action to follow those who are better positioned and better skilled at knowing how to address these kinds of challenges. And that's where we, why we're talking about SAC Act,
right?
Because SAC Act is an international organization that has focused their attention on these kinds of issues in the world, and
it is a chapter of the International Organization of Faith in Action, by the way. But
and there are others. There are other organizations. Our listeners can find many organizations that are having conversations about what to do, how to address these issues, and it's important that they reach out and Google Faith in Action, or other organizations.
And actually, Faith in Action will be able to give people a list of those organizations that are either in partnership with Faith in Action or actually a chapter of Faith in Action in their area.
And it's important to reiterate something you said earlier. It's important to realize that by doing that, you are following Jesus.
Right.
It's important that you recognize this is not an addendum. This is not an optional. I'm following Jesus, and if I want to, I can do something for my community.
Right.
No, those can't be separated. If you're a follower of Jesus, yes, there's a internal, personal spirituality about that, but when it comes to following Jesus with our lives, it always includes looking out for the most vulnerable among us.
Well, it was a good episode.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for tuning in, watching us, listening to us. As we said, we're going to bring some more information to you in the next coming episodes. So don't miss out. If you have any comments, anything you guys want to bring up, talk about, if you're just totally vibing with us or connecting with what we're talking about, of justice and wanting to do something, let us know. And maybe there's ways that we can also get you some resources. So through our social media, look us up, Deconstructors Club podcast. Through our YouTube, leave us a comment, a question if you need to. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, and of course YouTube. But our social media just gives the promos, the smaller versions of the videos on TikTok and on Instagram and even Facebook. But leave us a comment, let us know. And if there's any questions that you have, let us know too. So, All right. Well, it's good having you all with us today. And until next time, take care.